My name's Kirstin. I'm an addict. My story started pretty much back from whenever I was a child. And, there was a constant, trying to fit in, making up stories, lying a lot. And it was because, I didn't like my life. It was a lot of trying to keep up with other kids. I grew up on top of a mountain, super segregated. And, I remember, I didn't know what a PlayStation was until, a year after they came out, and, lying, saying I got a purple one, and, stuff like that. And, so there was a lot of acting out, a lot of attention-seeking behaviors and everything that started from the beginning. And then whenever I was 17, I got pregnant. And pregnancy went fine. I graduated high school at 6 months pregnant. I had my daughter. And after she was born, my gallbladder had burst inside of me, and I needed an emergency surgery. During that recovery time period, immediately after she was born, I was introduced to intravenous opioids for my pain management because I had emergency surgeries. And during that exposure, I had felt extreme, sweet relief. I no longer cared about what I looked like and about how much money I had, how I grew up. I didn't care about any of those things because it didn't matter anymore. And I had never felt that before in my life. That's all I had ever cared about, and that's all I had ever tried to cover up, and it's all that I'd ever tried to change or end. And so after I was released from the hospital and from medical care, I continued to seek that release and that relief from the pain that I had felt my entire life. And
through opioids?
Through opioids, yeah.
You were able to get them easily?
Yeah, yeah. It's very easy to get in touch with opioids. As soon as you meet one person that has access to it, it's like the whole world opens up to any drug that you could want. At least that was my experience. It was. Maybe it's because, I was a young white girl that people trusted me right away or something, but I was thrown immediately into a world where I had access to anything I wanted. I just needed to have money, or I needed to sell my body in some way. And, or I had to work. So I ended up pursuing that path. I started dealing for other people. And I eventually started dealing for myself. And, I supported my disease for a good while, but then I started to face some consequences legally. And in March of 2012, I was arrested and charged with 4 felonies. Indicted of them, not fully sentenced to them or charged, but I was indicted of those 4 felonies, and it was for growing marijuana in the state of West Virginia, and 2 of them were conspiracy charges against the great state of West Virginia is what the paperwork said. And so I was facing 12 to 40 years in prison at 20 years old. And I still had my daughter. She was about a year and a half whenever that happened. She was asleep in her crib whenever I was arrested. I didn't see her after that point. Her grandmother came and picked her up, and we'd never even talked about it. It was just, I knew that the gig was up, that there was no chance that I was going to get to see her again. At least not until I were to get my act together, until I were to stop doing the things that I was doing, stop hanging out with the people I was hanging out with, and stop using the way that I was using. So I was facing that 12 to 40 years, and I had lost my daughter, I'd lost my home, I'd lost my vehicle, I had lost pretty much everything, and I still continued to use for another 7 months. I woke up from a lot of blackouts. I don't know how many or for how long that they had lasted. At one point, I remember coming to in a White Castle drive-thru in Ohio in a random person's vehicle. I had found out not too long after that I was pregnant. And I couldn't stop using still. There was nothing that could keep me from using. And I knew that I wasn't going to be able to raise that child. I didn't know who the other parent was, and I didn't have any hope at all that anything would ever come good out of life for that child. So I had terminated the pregnancy. It was the hardest decision I think I've made in my life, and 2 weeks later I got clean. I reached my end. Someone had told me that there were meetings for people like me, and that there was treatment for people like me. And so I hitchhiked to a hospital and I sought help. I've been clean ever since.
They had a treatment program at the hospital?
My mother was working at the hospital, and she was the nurse manager of the behavioral health unit. And she had a rehab lined up for me for 2 years that she had already done all the research into, and that she knew that whenever I was ready, that's the one that she wanted me to go to. And so whenever I arrived, I asked to speak to the crisis counselor. They put me into an emergency room bed, and my mom was called, and she came down. And I was willing to go to treatment. You know, I was ready. I was done. At that point, I ended up going to a 28-day facility. And that's where I was introduced to 12-step fellowships and to the idea of even being able to stay clean and that it was possible and that there were other people just like me, you know.
So your mom was waiting for you to be ready?
My mom was waiting for me to be ready, yeah.
What's the one thing that you want people to know about addiction?
The one thing that I wish other people that are not like me would understand is that, I'm going to get emotional just thinking about it, that once the drug is in the body for the first time and that fire is lit, it's no longer a choice. There's no option except for to seek and destroy. And that's all that I had as an option for a long time. And that's all that most people have whenever they're an addict like me, you know? And typically what you hear from people out in public is that, you know, why don't you just stop? Why don't they just stop? And it's not that simple. You know, I faced so many things that, you know, typically you would believe would be a cause to stop using. You know, losing my daughter, facing 12 to 40 years in prison, getting pregnant, you know, and causing immense amounts of pain to my family, the legal consequences, all of it, you know, and none of that was enough for me to stop. I had to be completely done for myself and make that decision myself. And but it wasn't until the pain got great enough. And that pain for me was just insurmountable, you know. So I wish that that's something that, you know, society would understand.
Talk about being here this weekend at Healing Appalachia today and that experience of being here.
So the experience being here is, here at Healing Appalachia, is that there are people in all kinds of different paths of recovery that are coming together. And you can see that based off of all the tables that you walk around to, you know, different programs of recovery for the state of West Virginia, different opportunities for people, and a lot of people that are working at those tables are people that are themselves in recovery in some form or fashion. Whether they are themselves in recovery or they are related to somebody or affected by, the disease of addiction. So being able to see that type of an event, and there's music and family-friendly atmosphere, and dancing, and just a lot of fun happening around that. That's atypical from what you would see whenever you see all of these programs brought together. Typically what you see is that they're in some type of a ballroom in a hotel. There's a bunch of candy on tables, and people are speaking up on a stage. This is totally different, of a type of atmosphere. And I think that this brings a lot about, what West Virginia is about together. And that's pretty beautiful. It's unique.
Cool. Thank you. We're going to get the mic up.
Yeah.
You guys can get up there and watch some
I have
music.
a quick question. Do you mind?
Yeah.
I assume you went to the hospital. Your mom had said she had a plan for you in place, and you knew that when you went. What did it mean to you to have someone who hadn't given up on you? Well, everything you've learned.
You're going to make me cry again. So I had thought for a long time that no one believed in me. And I felt that, there were a lot of times that my family pushed me away, and that friends had pushed me away, and that employers had pushed me away. Even the church that I went to had pushed me away because they didn't understand me. They didn't know how to help me. They didn't know what was going on. And so, knowing that my mother had already known that I was battling the disease of addiction for so long, and having had, a facility for me to go to lined up in her mind and in her heart for so long, it definitely meant that, someone didn't give up on me, that there was hope, and that I could have my family back someday if I were to pursue that route and stay clean. But I felt like I was still loved, and I was understood whenever I felt like I wasn't understood at all.
You knew it was already set up for you when you went that
No,
night? No.
You did?
I didn't know.
Wow. At what point were you told that your mom had done this already?
So whenever my mom came into the emergency room, and she came to visit me, she had asked, what's going on? What help do you need here? And I told her I had asked to speak to a crisis counselor, and that's probably why she was called. And, that I was done using. I couldn't do it anymore. It wasn't working for me anymore, and that I needed help. And she started crying, and she basically immediately sprung into action, and she was like, listen, I did all the research, I've done it all, I know exactly where you're going, and we're gonna get you there as soon as possible. And then my stepdad, he drove me like 2 hours later. They were able to get a bed almost right away, and they struck while the pan was hot, and I didn't have a whole lot of time to back out of it, but
Well, I think moms know.
yeah.
And I think with what you told her, I think she knew
She knew.
to believe you this time.
Yeah. She knew I was ready. Yeah.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, it is.
And it's pretty great that she didn't tell you. She waited until that time.
Yeah. And up until that time, I always told her, like, I'm just smoking pot. Yeah, I'm just smoking pot.
Especially for her with her position, profession,
Yeah.
they can see through it.
Yeah. All the hiding of the track marks on my arms and legs, and she still knew.